This program is brought to you by Rudolph Thomas and Jolly's Toy Shop.
Rudolph Thomas Enterprise in Portsmouth, your suppliers of building materials and hardware products. Over 20 years experience in the business. Rudolph Thomas has lumber and plywood, galvanized and fenced pipe. Check out Rudolph Thomas for ceramic and vinyl floor and wall tiles, nails, nuts and bolts, paint and painting supplies. And check out their line of electrical and hand tools. Go now to Rudolph Thomas on 1240 Bay Street in Portsmouth.
Hello everyone, I am Julian Morris, inviting you to a very special post-Hurricane Maria interview with the Honorable Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit. It's an honor, sir. I want to thank you for the opportunity. I would like to begin with making reference to your address at the UN General Assembly. I listened to it myself at home and impressed with it. I want to make reference to some of the things you said there. Homes are flattened or buildings roofless or water pipes are smashed. Spoke of or crops being uprooted. He said, Mr. President, fellow leaders, the stars have fallen. Eden is broken. And not too long after that, Mr. Prime Minister, we saw Mr. Gutierrez, the Secretary General, coming here. Do you think to some extent that the impact of that address had something to do with the encouragement to have him come here?
Well, first of all, when I woke up on Thursday morning, I took the decision then to travel to New York to address the UN General Assembly, because I thought that it was a good platform to draw to the international community the situation confronting Dominica, because as you know, there was very little communication to and from Dominica as a result of the hurricane. So while there were images of Dominica on social media, I don't think the world had gotten a clear picture of the grave situation in Dominica. So the address at the UN was felt was important, and I would believe that it met its desired objectives, where it brought to the attention of the global community the serious devastation which Hurricane Maria wrought on Dominica. So, and of course, I met, subsequent to my address at the United Nations, I met with the Secretary General and discussed with him the situation. So I believe that it was in large measure a response to the address which we delivered at the United Nations.
One of the things, Mr. Prime Minister, I've always hoped I'll get an opportunity to ask you is that a question along the lines of your own experience. You've said it before, you've mentioned this to other people before, but very often I don't think people realize that even those in leadership like yourself have a story. So I wanted to get as early as I could in this interview your Hurricane Maria experience. Where were you at the time?
I went from my own experience. I don't like talking about it because I am the least of the apostles. And also too, there are many families who would have gone through worse experiences than I myself did. But my roof was affected very early in the hurricane, maybe after 9 in the evening or something like that. And it was a scary experience because I was in the house, and the roof went in the master bedroom very early, then in the living room. Then in one of the bedrooms. So I was right in the center of the building, and the sections of the roofs was caving in, right in my presence, So, and of course you had water coming in from the rain, heavy winds. It was a really frightening experience. For me, thank God, my children were not at the house with me. My wife and the children were out at the grandparents. because had they been at the home, they would have been in the master bedroom on the bed, and that's where the roof caved in first. So they would have either been injured or maybe killed by this hurricane. But we survived, and that's the most important thing.
Following day, you said you went out on foot.
I walked. Yeah, I left residence and I walked. Into Santa Roma, Goodwill, the hospital, for the city, surveying the destruction and the damage.
But for you, you're as Prime Minister, people in your position, you have a sort of a unique response. You have your own family situation, and you have the nation's responsibility on your shoulders. What is that? Like, give us some insight into that, because we're not in your shoes.
It's a huge challenge when you have a family and you're in public life. In most instances, you set aside your own personal challenges and that of your family for the greater good of the community or the country, the citizens. There are times your children may not see you for weeks or days. You may not have the opportunity to help them with their homework or guide them on certain things. So it's a huge untold sacrifice when you're in this public office and you have to also take care of your family responsibilities.
At an earlier press conference, you made reference to the impact of the storm on the economy and so on earlier today. And I was thinking what your thoughts were on how we are progressing generally as you look at it, since, almost 3 months now, how things are progressing.
In the scheme of things, I think Dominica has done quite a bit of work in restoring some sense of normalcy in the country. We were able to clear the roads, at least for vehicular traffic, very quickly. We're now doing the detailed cleaning and the clearing. We still have some work to do on this. We have been able to build some bailey bridges across some rivers and ravines to improve on the communication. All our schools are open. We are able to provide medical services at the PMH and several health centers across Dominica. Our farmers are back planting. We have started to export some of the crops which our farmers planted after Hurricane Maria. There's several businesses that have opened, and most of the government services are up and functioning in large measure. We have access to the ports, airport and seaport. So I think, taking everything into consideration, because we must not forget the state of the country on the morning of September 19th. Right? It was a huge task, and we have water in many communities. We're pressing on communities where we do not have pipe-borne water. We are trucking water in. We are building water tanks as temporary interim measures. Telecommunication is basically covered in almost every part of the country now. Cell phone service. So that we've done quite a bit of work, but the real heavy lifting hasn't really started. But certainly we're pacing ourselves in respect to that. But I think by and large, one can be satisfied with the extent of work that's been done.
Part of the work we'll have to do, and as you said to us repeatedly, is building back in a more resilient way the homes that we build. And sometimes I think there are people who have this notion that if we're going to be building back better with improved codes and so on, you're talking about a more expensive building, who will be able to afford it, that sort of thing, that sort of train of thought. Could you speak to
I understand the anxieties of people and the concerns and the questions in respect to some of the new vision that we're articulating, and the different components and aspects of that. In terms of construction, we are unable to relocate Dominica. So that's where we will remain as a country for the rest of our human existence as a country. And therefore, we have to be mindful of the climatic changes in the weather pattern. Or hurricanes will become much more fiercer, more frequent, and so forth. And therefore, it is not beyond human abilities to build structures to mitigate against those disasters. And we need to address the issue of construction in a broad way. it's about designs. Sometimes we design a home that is big and beautiful, aesthetically appealing, but it was not designed for our Caribbean islands. You see, and you have other issues where contractors may take shortcuts, the quality of the material, for example. And I can say to you, one of the aspects of the decision that the government will be taking to ensure that we receive quality materials in the country is that we will determine what type of material you put in government buildings. You use in government buildings. And those specifications will be in the contract. So if it is a 24 gauge galvanized, then we will include that in the contract. So you don't have to go and buy a lesser of a quality galvanized and compromise the integrity of the structure. So while building more climate resilient homes may have a little added expense because you now have to use the type of the proper material, and the PSI in the blocks and the PSI in the concrete must be tested, and therefore you know that when you get a block, it has the accurate PSI, and the concrete that you use for your slabs has the PSI, so it is the quote unquote the good concrete, and not concrete that, as you see in some of these hurricanes, where concrete columns and beams, got blown away like popcorn. You see, so we have to look at those issues. So while it may cost you an extra $10,000-$20,000, no, it is going to save you $100,000 down the road. And I suspect insurance companies may even start looking at the type of construction before they even insure your homes. So we have to prepare ourselves for this new reality. This is the new norm that we're dealing with. So, and in some cases, if it doesn't necessarily have to be more expensive, sometimes you build a home that is costly, but you don't get a quality. The quality of the home that you're building, you spend all this money for. So I think it's drawing awareness to homeowners, property owners, contractors, architects, engineers, all of us to understand we will all benefit if we follow the construction codes, the building codes, that we are more diligent and honest in our construction of people's homes, so that we do not have a situation where we're taking homeowners for a ride and then they have a problem where they do not have money now to fix the homes. But they just spent $500,000 on the new home, and the roof has been blown completely, windows smashed, and even concrete beams would have been compromised.
Could you speak, Mr. PM, to the importance of the way in which the UNDP is helping us with the assessment of the housing stock and so on, how that might feed into the codes issue?
Yeah, it's important insofar as having an appreciation for precisely how many homes you need to build, where you need to build those homes, what type of homes, the family structures, in terms of family size, you need to look at. So what we're doing is that that information will be inputted into the data system, so that we can use that as a basis to develop policies and programs to build homes and to decide where you build homes, how you build homes, who you're building for. So all this information that the UNDP is assisting us in collating will come in very useful in the preparation of programs and policies.
What I find very interesting since the hurricane is the announcement that we are really focusing on building more resilient buildings, but the issue of the role that CREAD will play in ensuring that these buildings are built to code. Having the first climate resilient nation in the world is a tremendous idea. So I wanted to ask you, I'm pretty much going in kind of a roundabout way in asking this, how CREAD's bearing it would bring on how buildings are.
Sure. I mean, CREAD is not dealing specifically with buildings of homes per se. We are seeking to implement a new vision for the country. And when we talk about resilience, we talk about resilience in a number of areas. I mean, look at our agriculture. We need to be advised on the zoning for agriculture. Where do we plant? What do we plant? Where we plant? The type of crops that are more climate resilient. For example, one of the resilient crops you will have is our root crops, potatoes and dashings and yams, and therefore we need to look at those things and other crops that are more climate resilient. We need to look at our ecosystems, our forests, and to see how we can cause our forests to be more resilient against these disasters, whether it's drought, whether it's heavy rains, whether it's flooding, whether it's hurricane, whatever storm it is. How can we address this issue? In terms of our telecommunication, we should never have a situation in a New Dominica where we're completely cut off from the rest of the world. Completely cut off from the rest of the world. So we started to engage the telecommunications companies to say, look, we have to do things differently. We have to look at the bearing of the cables in ducts, so that we do not have all of these poles all over Dominica. Same thing for Dominica and energy. We need to have those lines buried underground. And this is what we were seeking to do in Roseau. So the issue of resiliency started way before the hurricane. It has brought to sharper focus the need for us to do that. You realize that the bridge survived, and the bridge was high enough to allow the water to flow nicely, and the retaining walls were constructed. So this was the first phase of the Roseau enhancement that would ensure and assure greater resilience in the city from these disasters. And we would have constructed the retaining wall going all the way up to the Windsor Park to enhance the safety there, put all the cables underground, put all the drains will be slabbed so that people don't break their legs and all these things. So all of these things that we were doing in terms of, so we would have developed the city and let people know this is how we want to develop the rest of Dominica. And this is why we have to advance this project and push this project very quickly. So this is what we're talking about. Getting the best advice on engineering that is required. So when we're building a bridge, we should not be building a bridge so low in a major river. So we need to get the best advice on engineering, and it is available. Energy, we have to move towards renewable energy. And this is part of the resilience, looking at our geothermal, looking at our hydro, looking at our solar, and to move to that. So when we engage in Dominica, we engage in Emera on this new thrust or the punctuation of the thrust now, because we've been talking about renewable energy for some time, and so now we have an opportunity to advance this in a huge way. Our schools, our health clinics, we have to build smart, climate resilient hospitals. We actually started that process with the British government, building smart and climate resilient health centers and clinics. So what we're seeking to do in all new clinics we're building must take those things into consideration. We must look at issue of energy to these buildings, the issue of water to these buildings, the issue of the construction of the building. We cannot have a situation where the roof is blown off from a major hospital. That should not happen in the future. So all of these things we're looking at and ensuring that in the process of rebuilding the country, we ensure that if this disaster were to happen to us again, that we'll be in a better position to withstand the effects.
So CREAD itself...
CREAD now is the implementation agency. It will help coordinate the implementation of that vision for Dominica, because we'll be fooling ourselves in Dominica to believe that the way the government system is currently, or the public service is currently constructed, will be enough to implement the rebuilding plan for Dominica. What we have done over the last several weeks is to study countries in Asia, in Africa, in the Caribbean that have had such disasters, and to see what they have done, what did they do in response to those disasters, what mechanisms they put in place to facilitate their response. Where were the success stories? Where did they go wrong? What can we learn from these interventions? And it took us to Indonesia. You understand? It took us to Indonesia. And we studied the experience in Indonesia. We studied the successes in Indonesia. We spoke to partners who worked with the Indonesian government, donors who worked with the Indonesian government to develop that execution agency. And we also spoke to the executive director, the person who ran that agency over an extended period of time. So he was able to give us practical, on-the-job experiences and challenges which he experienced. And So we've consulted a wide range of international experts and regional experts in coming up with this idea of creating this execution agency. Now, what this agency will have is that it will have both a coordination and implementation role. So, but not all of the projects and programs it will be mandated to implement. There will be some, so there will be 50 interventions. We'll look at it and we'll say, okay, CREAD, you'll do this 30, and the relevant respective ministry will continue to implement the 20. So there will not be, it will not be a new government in place. It will be an agency of the state assisting the state in implementing the strategy and the vision for a new Dominica, a climate resilient Dominica. It will have in the first instance executive authority, meaning by a decision of the cabinet, but it will also be taken to Parliament for parliamentary authority. And what we have done as a government is that we have put in place certain structures. So we are inviting donors, those who will be making contributions to the trust fund, to sit on a board who will oversee the work of the CREAD, to ensure that the work has been done properly, to ensure and assure issues of good governance, of transparency, accountability, and to give their feedback and the suggestions on how we can proceed going forward. I can say to you, and also and additionally, we have included a parliamentary subcommittee of both government and opposition to be able to have access to the function of the CREAD. The executive director will come to the parliament to report to the parliament on how it is functioning, what are the challenges, what are the successes, which are the programs and projects they're working on, and parliament will have the opportunity to ask questions to the executive director. So all of the bases for accountability, transparency are covered in the present formulation of the CREAD. And we're satisfied, and of course the funding, there are many partners who have indicated their willingness to fund its operations. Obviously the government of Dominica will also make a contribution to it. We will be setting up a trust fund, and so that monies from the donors will be deposited into the trust fund to be utilized by the CREAD for implementation of agreed projects and programs. And of course there will be internal auditing and also external auditing of the financials of the CREAD.
I know that you've also mentioned in your address, or you were aware that there were attempts after Erica to put together what you call a National Vulnerability Risk and Resilience Fund.
Yeah.
And we had difficulties even before you could capitalize it. You said that here we were hit with Maria.
Yeah. Well, we had continued to work. As a matter of fact, a few days before Maria, we had given our okay on some aspects of it. It was actually articulated in the budget address of 2017. And what we have done since Maria, in a bid to have it operationalized, the government of Dominica, with its own resources, has set aside $1 million EC for the initial capitalization of the Disaster Vulnerability Risk Fund. So we have started the process of doing that. Obviously, the legal framework needs to be finalized. We are looking at that, and those funds will be deposited in a special account at the central bank, the OECS, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And our hope is that we will make contributions to the fund ourselves, but other benefactors, partners would also contribute to this particular fund. And of course, when disasters like that hit you, then you know, whether it's 5 million or 10 million or 15 or 20 million, you can draw on these funds very quickly to address some of the basic needs of the citizens during and after a hurricane.
Yes, one of the unintended consequences of these disasters is that displaced people end up in schools and so on, and in this case we've noticed that in certain instances you have students who are still out because the school is still being occupied by people. What would you say though to the planners, those who organize these things, to do a better job?
Well, you know, I mean, the challenge small countries always have is not having enough resources to put in place the infrastructure which you really need. I mean, and even in bigger countries, there are no buildings that are set aside exclusively as shelters. In many of the big countries, they use stadiums, they use major public spaces as shelters. In the United States, they will use stadiums, a basketball stadium or whatever it is, because they have huge spaces and so forth. What we're seeking to do, and we'll never have the ability to build specialized, dedicated hurricane shelters in every village in Dominica. We don't have the resources, and while it is something that would be desirable, it is not within our reach to do so. So you will still have to continue using schools in some communities as shelters, but you have to ensure the schools are built to withstand the elements. What we will do is we will build regional hurricane shelters. So you will have a hurricane shelter in Marigot, for example, that would serve west the Woodford. So a hurricane is coming, you have to move, so that shelter can be a multi-purpose facility, but also equipped to accommodate residents in the event of a disaster approaching. We have one in Portsmouth that could serve Capuchin and Bourne and Dodan, you see, and like one in Rose that could serve Roseau and environs. So we're looking at this in our whole effort to build back, to build resiliency, to build adaptation to these natural disasters. So all of these elements will be taken into consideration. So in these regional centers, you will have a storeroom with mattresses. You'll have kitchenettes. You'll have sufficient bathrooms. Your own water tank in the event that water goes away. Having a couple of chainsaws and basic implements in the event that you have to move and do some clearing and responses to a natural disaster. So all these things are part of the planning. But these are not things that will happen overnight. It requires planning, it requires consultation, it requires the funding. But it's important for us to put this down in a major master plan. And as the resources keep coming, we will implement the strategies based on priorities.
Maria devastated or destroyed as you said, over 200% of our GDP, and so we have situations, some of which you outlined again earlier today in a press conference, in the press briefing, talking about the reduced returns, or what government is really taking in in terms of taxes and so on and so forth. And in that scenario, we see, just following the hurricane, government agrees to pay or meet the demands of the unions and so on. How did you arrive at that decision to basically say, okay, let's go ahead and do this? Even considering that in a similar situation, perhaps another country, another government might say, hey, we need every dollar we can get to get this country back to it. Perhaps it's not the right time, perhaps push it, but you went ahead anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it was a difficult decision for the government to make or not to make. It was a legal obligation. It was an agreement entered between the state and the unions. Notwithstanding Hurricane Maria, we continue to pay our debts to various regional and international creditors. We have met our obligations to the Inland Revenue, we met our obligations to the Dominica Social Security. We have paid people who we owe for services that they've provided to us. So we try to be responsible, because what we do. And when we look at the situation also, you will have majority, if not every public servant affected by the hurricane. And many of the public servants outspend themselves. They spend more than they get every month, so they always have a financial problem. And they're not unlike many of us who work otherwise. So we felt that, while we're faced with an extraordinary situation, the public servants would need the money now more than any other time, And our hope and prayer is that they use it to make themselves more comfortable, and not spending on things that they do not really need. But it is their property, and they have their right and obligation and responsibility to spend it how they so wish. We just give them friendly advice and to caution them. But it is important for us to respect the agreement with the union, and this is why this is among the reasons why. So people need it more than ever, the legal obligation which we had, we had to pursue.
This next question, we're about to wrap up, but this question I have now has to do, will probably go well with the discussion on housing and so on. We saw, you might have already seen it yourself, because you went around, what the hurricane did to some of the Petro Casa buildings. I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of making sure they're built in such a way to reflect the codes that you're talking about.
So some of the Petro Casas that were badly affected by the hurricane, in large measure had to do with construction deficiencies and not necessarily design, because several of them survived. But there are a few of them that went down, or those that went down, you could have seen the construction defects. They were not constructed properly, period. But we have taken note of this, and this is why we're ensuring, as far as the government is concerned, if we're going to build homes for people, we need to ensure that not only the designs are up to par, but the construction is also up to par. And it's important for us to look at the inspection that's taking place. This is why, even with regards to the planning department, we're going to have to bring in a unit within the planning department that will deal exclusively with construction inspection, or inspection of constructions of buildings. So the present dispensation as it is now will not be continued. So we'll bring a team, we'll have structural engineering background, we will have architectural engineering background, whose mandate it is solely to inspect buildings that have been constructed and ensure that those buildings are inspected at the time frame stipulated by regulations. So there are a number of things that we have to look at within the government system. I think some of the things that we, the people of Dominica, have been talking about for a long time, but sometimes we do not allow governments to take decisions for long-term benefit, and we resist it, sometimes only to our own detriment. But the Petro Casas and the other buildings have been affected. You can see a lot of the buildings had to do with construction deficiencies.
Before I ask you your final question, I'd like to give you the opportunity now to say, just about anything you might want to say right now, in terms of anything else you feel you might want to say before I ask you the final question.
No, the task we have at hand is a huge task, and it's important for all of us to work together. We may have differing views and divergent views, but arguing among ourselves unnecessarily is not going to solve the problem. We have to learn from the experiences and put systems in place to mitigate against those instances during a hurricane. The things that all of us may not be happy about, the things that I'm not happy about, which took place during a hurricane or after the hurricane. But it will be of no use or benefit to anybody if I just spend my time griping about it. We now have an opportunity as a country to put systems in place to allow for this thing not to happen again. Okay? And this is why we're hoping to have the national consultation in January, where we'll invite the stakeholders, the political party groups, the unions, the various private sector firms, the media, civil society, students. We may have it in different groups, maybe because you don't have the venue for everybody and the opportunity for everybody to share a view. So we may have different days for consulting different sectors and groups in the society. But certainly we will give an opportunity for everybody to have a better appreciation for what is the Climate Resilient Execution Agency all about, how it's going to function, what are the things it will be doing, how it's going to report to you, how are you going to know what's happening within that entity. When we speak about building the world's first climate resilient nation, what do we mean in terms of different elements of the society, of the economy, so that you too can give your contribution and your comments and say, yes, this is what it is. But we have started. It is work in progress. It has been taking a lot of our time because we started the process in this very same week after the hurricane, or same week of the hurricane, and it has been a lot of work. And we're very grateful to all our partners who have been making this contribution to us.
Prime Minister Skerrit, this will be I would safely say, a Christmas with a difference for a lot of people. I mean, we have to be grateful for what has happened so far, the speed with which we have come out of the woods, so to speak, but there's still a lot left to be done. There are people who are going into Christmas under tents, tarpaulins, and temporary accommodation and so on. What would your final words be to these people?
Well, you know, I mean, we always have to understand it could have been worse. And once we're alive, we have to thank God for that. We can always put a roof back on our homes. We can always build back our homes. We can always rebuild our farms, our businesses. But we cannot replace life. And we have our families next to us. Unfortunately, many of our citizens and friends and family perished in the hurricane. Those of us who were able to survive it are alive, and we're going to thank God for that. It could have been much worse. When all of us have to recount how we passed this hurricane, how we survived the hurricane, it is only by the mercy of God why we're alive. Not having a roof on our heads, having tarpaulin is a temporary thing. That will be fixed. Let us look at the bright side of things and indicate that one day things will get better by the grace of God. But so we have to be thankful, and I think it's an opportunity for us to focus more on giving for Christmas and more community spirit. In the old days, in the old days, how we did it, went home to home, bringing Christmas joy with little that we have. You know, the more we became affluent in society, the less community oriented we have been. So it's an opportunity now that we all are in this boat together. We've all been affected by this hurricane. We all have experiences to retell. Let us now work together towards rebuilding a more prosperous and just Dominica. Christmas is a time for us to reflect on the birth of Jesus Christ and what He meant for all of us on earth. So this things are temporal. It's temporary, you know. They will be fixed, and the government will assist with the limited resources it has to make life better for as many citizens as possible.
Prime Minister Skerrit, thank you very much for joining us for this interview, and thanks to you at home for joining us as well.
This program was brought to you by Rudolph Thomas and the Jolly's Toy Shop.
Rudolph Thomas Enterprise in Portsmouth, your suppliers of building materials and hardware products. Over 20 years experience in the business. Rudolph Thomas has lumber and plywood, galvanized and fence pipe. Check out Rudolph Thomas for ceramic and vinyl floor and wall tiles, nails, nuts and bolts, paint and painting supplies. And check out their line of electrical and hand tools. Go now to Rudolph Thomas on 1240 Bay Street in Portsmouth.